They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. A place where even sound seems to die, ADX Florence. But outside those walls, families wait in silence too. Mothers, wives, sons, serving a sentence of their own. This is their story. A story of waiting, of letters that never arrive, of voices that vanish into concrete. Before we begin, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what you're about to hear are real stories drawn from public records, interviews, and federal reports, told by those who lived it but never got heard. The prison you never truly leave. In the heart of Colorado's high desert, just beyond a ridge of pale rock and sagebrush, stands a fortress that doesn't need guards on the walls. ADX Florence, officially opened in 1994, was designed for one purpose: total control. From the outside it looks almost ordinary. Low concrete buildings, flat roofs, a scattering of towers. But hidden beneath that unassuming surface is a world of permanent isolation. Each inmate lives alone, inside a concrete box no larger than a parking space. The bed, the desk, the stool, all poured from the same slab of gray. Most prisoners never see another human being without steel and glass between them. They spend 23 hours a day in silence. The remaining hour, in a small exercise cage the size of a dog run. For the men inside, time stops. But for their families, time stretches, slowly breaking them apart. One of the first mothers to speak publicly about life after ADX was Mary Bomarito, mother of inmate Robert Hansen, the former FBI agent turned spy. When Hansen was sentenced to life at ADX, Mary described it as a death that never ends. She wasn't exaggerating. Even the Bureau of Prisons acknowledged that communication from ADX is extremely limited. Letters are read, scanned, delayed, sometimes never delivered. Phone calls? Maybe once a month. Visits? Often canceled without notice. It's not just punishment for the inmate, it's punishment for everyone who loves them. In 2014, the American Civil Liberties Union published a report on what they called the secondary trauma experienced by families of supermax prisoners. One wife said she had not touched her husband in 15 years. Another said her children barely recognized their father's voice when he finally called. In the eyes of the Bureau of Prisons, ADX was built to contain the worst of the worst. Men like Terry Nichols, Oklahoma City bombing, Ramzi Youssef, 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. But over the years, ADX became home not just to terrorists, but to mentally ill inmates, informants, and men whose only crime inside prison was violence against other prisoners. To their families, it doesn't matter what label the system gives. They see only the man they once knew, now locked in silence. Former Warden Robert Hood, who ran ADX from 2002 to 2005, once said bluntly, "It's not designed for humanity. It's not designed for rehabilitation. It's designed for control." Those words haunted many families. Because control meant distance, and distance meant disappearance. Families often describe their lives in two halves, before ADX and after. Before, they wrote letters, planned visits, fought appeals. After, they learned to talk to walls, to speak to silence. In 2016, the family of inmate Thomas Silverstein, one of America's longest-held prisoners in solitary confinement, filed a civil complaint describing his decades in isolation. Silverstein's daughter told reporters she had no memory of hugging her father since childhood. When he died in 2019, she said it felt like losing him twice, once when he went in and once when he never came back. The Bureau insists ADX provides ample opportunities for family contact. But families tell another story, one of long drives to Colorado only to be turned away, of visits canceled because of operational issues, of children aging without knowing their father's face. And yet they keep going. Because for many, staying connected, even through silence, is an act of rebellion. An act of love against the hardest place in America. As one former inmate's wife said in a 2019 PBS interview, ADX doesn't just bury men. It buries their memories. For the families, that's the hardest sentence of all. Letters that never arrived. For most families of ADX inmates, letters are the last lifeline, fragile paper bridges stretching between two worlds. Inside ADX Florence, every message in or out is screened, scanned, and sometimes silently discarded. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons Policy Statement 5800.16, all correspondence is subject to inspection for security reasons. That phrase, "for security reasons," became the quiet excuse that shattered families. Wives who sent birthday cards never saw a reply. Children who drew pictures for their fathers never knew if those drawings reached the cell. Sometimes months later the letters came back, stamped, undeliverable. Returned to sender. One mother, Patricia Murphy, wrote to her son every week for 10 years. Her son, Sean, was serving a 40-year sentence for armed robbery. When journalists from the Marshall Project interviewed her in 2018, she showed them a box filled with unopened envelopes, all returned. She said, "I started writing even when I knew they weren't getting through. It was my way of pretending he could still hear me." At ADX, most inmates are allowed 2 one-page letters per week, but even that right is sometimes restricted for disciplinary reasons. Some men, according to court filings in Silverstein v. Federal Bureau of Prisons, waited over 90 days for mail to clear security. The waiting is its own form of punishment. Inmates describe holding on to memories of voices, of laughter, of the smell of home, fading 1 week at a time. Former ADX inmate Jack Powers, who later testified before Congress about the psychological toll of isolation, said, "You start writing letters to stay sane. Even if no one answers, you write. Because that's how you prove you still exist." For families, receiving a letter from ADX was a small miracle. Most described them as thin, emotionless, almost sterile, stripped of warmth because every line could be read by staff. But between the words, love found ways to breathe. One inmate wrote his son, "I'm proud of the way you run. Keep running, son. Every lap you make out there, I'm doing with you in my head." That single page took 3 weeks to clear security. By the time it reached the boy, his father had been placed on communications restriction for writing too many letters. The Bureau of Prisons defends these policies as necessary to prevent coded messages or threats. But in a 2020 review by the Office of the Inspector General, investigators found that ADX's communication review system often led to unintended emotional distress for families, particularly minors, due to prolonged or lost correspondence. In plain words, families suffered not because they broke any law, but because the system buried their love under red tape. There was the story of Luis Rivera, convicted of organized crime-related murder. His wife, Carmen, lived in El Paso. She wrote her husband every Sunday, for 11 years. In one letter she described how she'd drive to the edge of a desert highway, look toward Colorado and whisper a prayer. When Reuters interviewed her in 2019 she said, "They talk about rehabilitation. But how can a man be rehabilitated if he never hears his name spoken by someone who loves him?" Every holiday, families of ADX inmates form quiet rituals. Some light candles. Some cook their loved one's favorite meal and leave an empty chair. And some, like Patricia, still write letters knowing they'll never be read. Even digital communication, something most prisons allow, is almost non-existent at ADX. Unlike other federal facilities, ADX restricts TrueLinks, the monitored email system, to a limited list of inmates. According to court documents, as of 2021, fewer than 10% of ADX prisoners had access. So families turned to the past, to pens, envelopes, and prayers. In one particularly haunting story, an inmate's daughter wrote a letter to the warden, asking if her father was alive. She was 9 years old. She drew a heart at the bottom. 3 months later the reply came, a formal letter from the Bureau. "Your father is in good health and continues to serve his sentence at ADX Florence." No name. No emotion. Just the machinery of bureaucracy grinding against the beating heart of a child. Yet through it all these families endure. Their love, censored, delayed, and dissected, somehow survives. Because for them writing isn't about being heard. It's about not giving up. Even if the letters never arrive. The visit that never happened. For families of ADX inmates, a prison visit is not just a journey, it's a pilgrimage. A drive through empty desert roads, a flight to the middle of nowhere, hours of security checks, and a brief moment of eye contact through thick glass, all for the chance to say, "I still remember you." The prison sits just outside the small town of Florence, Colorado, population barely 4,000. To most travelers, it's an invisible place. One gas station, one diner, and a horizon that stretches forever. But for the families of the men inside, Florence is holy ground. Yet for many that pilgrimage ends in heartbreak. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons Visitation Regulations, Program Statement 5267.09, ADX inmates are allowed non-contact visits, with approved family members, typically 1 or 2 hours, once or twice a month. But in practice, even that limited privilege is often canceled, delayed, or denied. A 2017 audit by the Office of the Inspector General revealed that ADX had the highest visitation cancellation rate in the entire federal system, More than 30% of scheduled visits were terminated for operational reasons. That phrase could mean anything: staff shortage, lockdown, weather, or, sometimes, nothing at all. For the families who traveled thousands of miles, the reasons didn't matter. The result was the same: a closed gate. One of those families belonged to Maria Vasquez, whose brother, Daniel, had been at ADX since 2009 for a drug-related homicide. In 2016, Maria flew from California with her mother, a 78-year-old diabetic woman who had saved 6 months of her pension for the trip. When they arrived after a full day's journey, they were told the prison was on lockdown. No visit. No refund. No reschedule. Maria told the Denver Post. "My mom cried in the car for 2 hours. She kept saying, 'He doesn't even know we came.'" What made ADX different from any other federal prison wasn't just the isolation inside, it was how the isolation extended outward, pulling entire families into its shadow. Non-contact visitation at ADX happens in a narrow booth divided by reinforced glass. An inmate is led in, wrists and ankles cuffed, seated on a steel stool bolted to the floor. Across the glass, a family member sits in silence until a guard activates the intercom. Voices echo with static. There are no hugs, no handshakes, only eyes meeting eyes through reflection. A 2015 psychological study by Drive Craig Haney, a leading expert on solitary confinement, found that familial separation in supermax conditions leads to symptoms of prolonged grief and social withdrawal, especially among mothers and children. Many of those mothers described the visits as both a comfort and a wound, seeing but not touching. One said, "It felt like visiting a ghost." For children, the visits could be even more confusing. In a 2018 Human Rights Watch report, a woman described taking her 10-year-old daughter to see her father at ADX. She pressed her hand against the glass. "You did too." She laughed because it looked like they were holding hands. Then she asked why the glass was so cold. The Bureau maintains that these rules are essential for safety. But critics argue the system punishes entire families for crimes they never committed. Even Robert Hood, the former warden, admitted in a 2019 NPR interview, "If I had to design hell, it would look a lot like ADX." For some families, the emotional cost is so great that they stop trying. Traveling to Florence becomes too expensive, too painful, too uncertain. Instead, they hold on to the last memory, a voice, a laugh, a letter from years ago. But a few refuse to surrender. They turn their pain into advocacy. In 2014, a coalition of families launched a small online network called Voices Beyond the Walls. Their mission: to share stories, document denied visits, and lobby for humane reforms. One of their founders, Tanya Johnson, whose husband was at ADX for gang-related murder, said in a podcast interview, "They tell you not to come. They make it hard. They make it expensive. But when you love someone in there, you show up anyway, even if all you get is 5 minutes through glass." Those words became the movement's unofficial motto. And every few months, new families join, from Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, or New York, each with the same story, the same heartbreak. The visits that never happened became more than missed moments. They became a pattern of silence, a system that made forgetting easier than remembering. Because in the world of ADX Florence, isolation is contagious. It doesn't just live inside the cells. It reaches the front gate, the parking lot, and the hearts of those waiting outside. As one warden once put it, ADX doesn't just separate inmates from society, it separates society from them. The forgotten children. For the children of men inside ADX Florence, life often begins with a lie. A mother says, "Daddy's away working," or "He's in another state." Because how do you explain to a 5-year-old that their father lives in a concrete box, locked away from every sound, every touch, every day? There are an estimated 1.5 million children in the U.S. who have a parent in prison. Only a few hundred of them have a parent in ADX Florence, but their silence is just as deep. When reporters from The Guardian interviewed several ADX families in 2020, most said their children had never once visited. The reasons were simple: distance, cost, fear, and shame. One mother from Chicago, Danielle R., described how her son used to draw pictures for his father every week. "He stopped after he turned 8, she said. "He told me, it's no use. He can't see me anyway." Growing up in shadows. Children of ADX inmates grow up in a peculiar kind of absence. Not the loss of death, but the loss of voice. They don't have closure. They have questions that no one wants to answer. Psychologists from the National Institute of Corrections have written about this phenomenon, calling it invisible incarceration. A child might live a normal life, go to school, play sports, smile for photos, but part of them is always waiting for a letter that may never come. Teachers often don't know. Classmates don't ask. And when they do find out, the reaction can be brutal. One teenager told Human Rights Watch, "When I told a friend my dad's at ADX, they said, 'That's where the terrorists go.' I never told anyone again." For these kids, secrecy becomes survival. The longest distance. Most families live hundreds or even thousands of miles from Florence, Colorado. A single visit can cost over $1,500 in airfare, rental car, hotel, and food. For working-class families, often mothers raising children alone, that cost is impossible. The result? Children grow up never hearing their father's voice, because ADX calls are restricted and supervised. Phone calls are limited to a few minutes, sometimes once a month. The sound is delayed, mechanical, like hearing someone from another planet. One young woman, Alicia, now 23, told PBS Frontline that she first heard her father's voice when she was 17. He had been at ADX since she was 2. He said, "You sound just like your mom." I said, "You sound like a memory." That single phone call lasted 6 minutes. Collateral damage. Experts call it collateral punishment. When the justice system isolates a prisoner, it isolates everyone connected to them. Dr. Nancy LaVigna of the Urban Institute found that children of Supermax inmates are more likely to experience anxiety, social withdrawal, and academic decline. The stress doesn't come from violence or poverty, it comes from disconnection. There's a cruel irony in that. The Bureau of Prisons says its mission includes preparing inmates for successful re-entry. But how can a man return to a world where his own children don't know his face? One counselor at a family support nonprofit in Denver put it simply. By the time some of these fathers get out, their kids are adults. The window to bond is gone. And yet, even in that loss, there's resilience. Resilience in silence. A small number of families have found ways to bridge the distance. They record audio messages, send family photos through approved mail, and celebrate birthdays by mailing drawings and poems. In 2021, an advocacy group called Children of Solitary launched an online campaign, sharing artwork from kids whose parents were in Supermax confinement. One picture showed a house made of gray bricks with a bright yellow sun above it. The caption read, "So he can see light again." Those drawings became part of a traveling exhibit shown in schools across Colorado, a quiet reminder that punishment doesn't end with conviction. The emotional toll. For mothers, the hardest part is explaining why their children can't touch their father. Many described inventing bedtime stories, where the dad is a hero on a mission or a builder working far away. But as children grow older, the truth inevitably surfaces. A 2020 New York Times investigation documented cases where teenagers learned about their father's crimes online before hearing it from family. One girl found her dad's name on a terrorism watch website. She said, "It felt like I didn't know who he was anymore." For these children, forgiveness and identity become lifelong struggles. Society tells them to forget, but love refuses to fade. A generation waiting. There's a line from an old inmate letter written by a father to his son. "One day when you see the mountains, know that I'm behind one of them, still watching over you." That letter was mailed from ADX Florence in 2003. It never reached its destination. It was returned, marked Security Review, withheld. But the son, now an adult, keeps a copy of that envelope. He told reporters, "It's proof he tried." For every ADX inmate there's a family outside, waiting, surviving, remembering. For every child, there's a story that begins not with crime but with absence. And in that absence, America's most secretive prison continues to cast its longest shadow. For the families of ADX Florence inmates, punishment doesn't end with the sentence. It extends outward, reaching living rooms, dinner tables, and the hearts of those waiting in silence. They didn't commit the crimes. They didn't stand in front of a judge. But they live every day with the echo of a door that never opens. ADX was built to contain America's most dangerous men, but it has also contained their memories, their voices, and their humanity. The stories you've heard, of lost letters, missed visits, and forgotten children, are not exceptions. They are the unspoken truth of what extreme isolation does to everyone it touches. As one former warden once said, ADX is not a place built to rehabilitate men. It's a place built to erase them. But outside those walls, families resist that erasure. Every letter sent, every prayer whispered, every memory kept alive becomes an act of defiance. Because love, even in silence, can outlast concrete. If this story moved you, don't let it disappear too. Subscribe, leave a comment below, and share this documentary so that more people can understand the hidden cost of isolation and the families living in its shadow. Every share helps bring their voices back from behind the walls.